We recently revealed some of the things that we do during fantasy football drafts that most people don't. And one of those things is to look for players coming off of down seasons. Well, here are 10 of our favorite bounce back candidates for 2024.
If you can't wait to start drafting fantasy football teams, you don't have to. Underdog Fantasy has drafts with entry fees as low as $4 and prize pools up to $15 million. And of course, their flagship Best Ball Mania 5, where someone will win over $1 million. Plus, if you sign up and use promo code ENDGAME, you'll get a special pick that you can use to potentially win 325 times your entry. And you're going to get up to $250 in bonus cash. Don't wait. Go join Underdog Fantasy now and use promo code ENDGAME to get your special pick and cash.
All right, let's start off with some of these earlier picks and drafts and some young wide receivers who haven't come close to hitting their potential yet.
Yes, and I'm going to start with Jalen Waddle. I've talked about him multiple times this offseason, and I keep saying the same thing. This isn't going to be the guy I talk about where I give you these stats or these analytical numbers or these things to why I can point out to say, this is why Jalen Waddle is going to be much better this year. I really don't have anything like that for Jalen Waddle, other than the fact that last year, yes, he played most of the games. He played 14 games last year. But there were 5 games where he played less than 70% of the snaps, ran less than 70% of the routes. He wasn't 100% last year. So that right there, I think, makes him a great bounce back candidate. But really what I like about Jalen Waddle is he's an elite wide receiver, a stud wide receiver in the prime of his career in one of the league's best offenses. In fact, last year it was the league's best offense in terms of scoring and yards per game. And for me, when you have a player like this who had a down year, really for no other reason than maybe partly because of injury, but also partly just because it was one of those years, right? Some guys just have down years sometimes. These are the guys that I think are the prime bounce back candidates, the guys you got to take advantage of, because a lot of people in your fantasy leagues are just going to look at what a player did last year, and they're going to use that to project what that player is going to do this year. They're going to say, he wasn't very good last year. Oh, Tyreek Hill is the number one guy there. They got Achane. But I'm going to bet on Jalen Waddle making a big bounce back. Don't forget, just 2 years ago, the first year Tyreek Hill was there, Jalen Waddle had almost 1,400 receiving yards, had 8 touchdowns, and Tyreek Hill went over 1,700 yards that year. There is enough meat on the bone for both of these guys here. I think Jalen Waddle is a great early round discount in fantasy drafts, and I think he's a prime candidate to bounce back in a big way this year.
All right, now I'm going to go to an offense that you could argue pretty much is full of guys who should bounce back. The Atlanta Falcons have to be better, right? They just have to. You know why. Arthur Smith finally gone. And, getting an actual real quarterback would help. That's Kirk Cousins. So let's look at Drake London. I think this is the year that he steps up and becomes a number one wide receiver for fantasy. He's still been the number one receiver for the Falcons, of course, after being the top receiver selected in his draft class, but it hasn't felt that way for fantasy, I know. And look, the same goes for Kyle Pitts, and I know Kyle Pitts can and probably will bounce back, but he also has to show that he can stay fully healthy, and he's a tight end. All right, let's face it. Drake London, the ceiling is higher. Drake London just needs a quarterback to get him the ball, because last year he dealt with Desmond Ridder / Taylor Heineke. Desmond Ridder was 38th among quarterbacks in adjusted completion percentage. Taylor Heineke, believe it or not, somehow ranked 70th. You probably didn't know there were that many quarterbacks who threw a pass last year, but yes, that's how low it goes. And so, new offense, new quarterback, and Kirk Cousins slings it. He's good at slinging it, and he likes to go to his number one receiver, as you've seen in his time in Minnesota, and Justin Jefferson. So maybe Drake London doesn't get to Justin Jefferson type numbers, but still, we know the sky's the limit in this new offense. Drake London seems like a no-brainer in round 2 because he's out there. He's not being drafted as a top 10 receiver, but he could easily get there this year. All right, who's another wide receiver that you feel like is going to bounce back this year?
Yeah, I think Chris Godwin is going to be one of the biggest bounce back wide receivers this year. And this is a guy you could typically get like in round 6 or 7 of your fantasy draft. When you look at him from 2020 to 2023, back in 2020, averaged 16 points per game. 2021 had that great year, 17 points per game. 15 points per game in 2022, and then, of course, last year, only 12 fantasy points per game, a really down year for Chris Godwin. And a lot of people are going to point to the touchdowns, and yes, he only had 2 touchdowns last year. But the year before that, when he averaged 15 points per game, he only had 3. And the year before that, when he averaged over 17 points per game, he only had 5. I don't think touchdowns, that's not the reason why I'm so high on Chris Godwin this year. I mean, yes, he'll probably score more than 2, but the real difference for me, Chris Godwin from last year to those other years, was how much he played out of the slot. You look at those other years, 2020, 55% in the slot. 2021, 58% in the slot. 2022, 57% in the slot. Last year, only 32% in the slot. And already the new offensive coordinator talking about we need to get Chris Godwin back in the slot. Todd Bowles talking about we need to get Chris Godwin back in the slot. That is where he thrives. Look, he had 131 targets last year. It wasn't like he wasn't targeted. He was. The problem is they were asking him to be an outside wide receiver, run deeper routes. That's not his game. He's going to get those layup throws from Baker Mayfield now. He's still going to probably go 130 plus targets this year, but now it's going to be out of the slot with, yes, probably more touchdowns. So Chris Godwin, another wide receiver, I think just looks like an easy, obvious bounce back candidate.
I think one of the most obvious picks to bounce back is a guy who not only had a very down season, but is now moving to the Kansas City Chiefs offense, and that is Hollywood Brown. Now, typically, you would think that going from being the clear obvious number one, not just receiver, but target in an offense, to going to a team that kind of spreads the ball around and has other receivers there, like Chiefs tend to do, that might not be a good thing for fantasy, but it definitely is for Hollywood. So first of all, last year, it was really strange for Hollywood Brown because he was expected to have a big season. Like I said, there really wasn't much competition there for targets. But, you know, if you remember last year, Hollywood Brown, the first month of the season was fine. He was actually really good. And then about week 6, all of a sudden we saw this big drop-off, and it was odd how it happened. And then 6 straight weeks, he didn't even hit 50 yards receiving. He was out there, and everyone's like, just what happened? There's got to be something going on. Sure enough, a couple of weeks later, after that stretch of futility, he was injured, didn't play the rest of the season. So very sour taste in the mouths of people who drafted Hollywood Brown or had him, because it didn't help you at all in the fantasy playoffs, and really left you hanging throughout the middle of the season. So physical issues aside, if he's healthy, that helps. He's got to do better than 574 yards last year, because that's really abysmal for where he was drafted and where he was expected to be in terms of fantasy. So besides the fact that, he'll be out there hopefully every week and healthier, and that he will be better than he was last year, he's now got Pat Mahomes. And look, Kyler Murray wasn't bad last year, but anybody who is a receiver in the NFL is getting an upgrade when they go to Kansas City and gets Pat Mahomes as their receiver. That should improve his 50% catch rate. He'll get more catchable targets than ever before. And look, I don't think that target competition is a big problem because, Travis Kelce's there. He had a stud tight end in Trey McBride to contend with last year. That wasn't really the issue. Rashee Rice, how many games is he playing this year? Xavier Worthy already contending with a hamstring issue. He's not a sure thing to be a target hog. Let's face it, Hollywood Brown will be totally fine and might have his best season yet. All right, let's get some running backs in the mix. Give me an RB that you feel is going to take a step up this year.
Yeah, speaking about a player getting an upgrade, how about Josh Jacobs going to the Green Bay Packers? This is absolutely an upgrade on offense for Josh Jacobs. Now, I know, the one positive thing about being on the Las Vegas Raiders was that he was the clear, undisputed workhorse running back. In fact, if you go back to 2022, when he was one of the most surprising, truly a league-winning running back, he had almost 400 touches that year. He's not going to get 400 touches in Green Bay. It's just not the way Matt LaFleur rolls with his running backs. But what he is going to get is way more efficient, because last year, only 3.5 yards per carry last year. Not even 300 yards on almost 40 catches. I mean, the efficiency was terrible. And when you watched him, if you watched any Raiders games, which you probably didn't unless you're a fan because they weren't any good, he was just running into brick walls because the defense knew they didn't have to worry about the pass and the offensive line wasn't that good. He gets an upgrade at offensive line, and he certainly gets an upgrade at quarterback with Jordan Love. Jordan Love in the second half last year looked like the guy who could be the franchise QB. Teams are going to have to respect this passing game. That's going to open up lanes for Josh Jacobs. And look, Josh Jacobs is not a guy that's been one of the most efficient running backs. I mean, prior to last year, he had 3.9 yards per carry, 4 yards per carry. You don't need crazy hyper efficiency with Josh Jacobs, even though I think you're going to get good enough efficiency. It's a fact that he's going to be in a better offense, more chances to score, and they're going to use them in the passing game. We know that they like to use these running backs in the passing game. So Josh Jacobs, to me, no, I don't think he's going to do what he did in 2022 because that was an incredible year. But I think we could see something closer to what we saw with him in his time with the Raiders, where he averaged at least 14 PPR points per game every year of his career. I think he bounces back to that, maybe even better this year.
Well, let's say in that Green Bay offense, like you said, Jordan Love took a big step forward last year, and that means there should be fantasy goodness to be spread around among a lot of those players. Let's talk about Christian Watson, a player I know you're in on this year like I am. I mean, on the one hand, this is super simple. Just stay healthy. Just stay on the field. That's it. If he's out there and he's even close to 100%, he's a stud. We know this. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Christian Watson, despite being back and forth with that same hamstring injury, and again, let's just assume he actually stays healthy for most of the season, it is absolutely worth investing in because he can be a legit stud for fantasy. In terms of fantasy points per route run last year, he was up there with guys like Devontae Smith, George Pickens, Zay Flowers, right? He just needs to run more routes, all right? So that's pretty simple. This is also something that gets overlooked so much. You don't think of a guy like Christian Watson, who's not a big receiver, right? Not a big body. You think of him as a speed guy. I don't think people realize how many end zone targets he got. He, despite playing only 9 games last year, was 7th in end zone targets. Now, a lot of those end zone targets didn't come through, right? He didn't catch a bunch of touchdowns, but they kept going to him despite that. And they will continue to go to him. That's just what they do when they get down near the red zone. Yeah, they got Josh Jacobs now, but they're still going to pass it quite a bit in the end zone. This is just a good, efficient offense. They don't have somebody who is necessarily their one go-to player. But Christian Watson is going to lead the pack here. He's a deep threat. He's an end zone threat. He's an everything threat. This is the kind of guy you want. So again, just stay healthy for most of the season, and you got maybe a league winner here. All right, but back to more running backs. Let's talk about a couple of veterans now who could be due for better times.
Are we already calling Javonte Williams a veteran, this poor guy? I mean, I guess he is going into year 4, but it still feels like it almost feels like he's a rookie, right? Because it feels like he's barely played, although I guess last year he did play a full season, but he's either going to be a complete bust, his NFL career is just going to be a bust, or he's going to bounce back because he was terrible last year. Coming off of ACL, averaged only 3.6 yards per carry, only 4.9 yards per reception. That is horrible for a running back. In fact, it ranked 38th among all running backs. But go back and look at him as a rookie. 4.4 yards per carry, 7.3 yards per reception. That was 16th among all running backs. This is a good player. I still believe he's a talented player. Now, he's not in a talented offense, that's for sure. We're probably going to be looking at rookie Bo Nix. Not going to be one of the league's best offenses, no matter how hard Sean Payton tries. But I think Javonte Williams is going to be the guy here. I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin, okay, whatever. Like Samaje Perine, is he even still going to be on the roster? Audric Estime, who they drafted, ran like a 4.7, 5.40 or something, like he was towing a truck. Wasn't really one of my favorite prospects anyways. I think Javonte Williams is going to be the guy here. He's a very capable pass catcher, and with a rookie quarterback, I think he's going to get plenty of checkdowns, plenty of receiving work. No, probably not going to score double-digit touchdowns. I'm not going to call Javonte Williams a league winner necessarily, but a guy you can draft very late in your draft. We're talking like early double-digit rounds, and if he's like a guy you can put in as an RB2 with decent upside, that's going to be great for you. I think Javonte Williams definitely ready to bounce back in 2024.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Ramondre Stevenson is necessarily a league winner this year. I think last year, look, we were very high on Ramondre, and it just wound up being very disappointing. A lot of that was due to injury because he did miss a chunk of time late in the season when you needed him most. But it was also kind of just a sluggish season overall for him because, I mean, he was in the Patriots offense, Mac Jones / Bailey Zappi. Okay, that's all behind him. So we know, first of all, I kind of hate to say, but this offense can't get worse. I don't think it can. We got new coaching staff here, new system, new quarterback, but the same running back. And in fact, it's not just, well, Ramondre is still there and he's a starter. They just gave him a big extension, 4 years, $36 million. What does that tell you? He's not just the RB1 there. He's going to be the central focus of that offense because you're going to have a rookie quarterback in at some point, and sure, placeholder Jacoby Brissett for the meanwhile, but this offense is not going to be out there trying to throw it deep every play. You got a bunch of rookie receivers as well. This is going to look a little bit more like the old school Patriots offense still for the time being until Drake May really steps up and shows that he's capable of leading this offense. But this is going to be a lot of Rhamondre. And kind of like last year, there's no other threat to his workload. They just basically swapped out old Zeke Elliott for, mid Antonio Gibson. Sure, he'll come in once in a while and do some things, but come on. Rhamondre is still going to be a workhorse back in terms of touches, and that includes receptions. He's going to get a ton of touches, and let me remind you, the number one predictor of fantasy production for a running back is touches. That's it. You touch the ball a lot, you're going to score points. It actually is that simple sometimes, and Rhamondre is going to get those touches, and you can draft him as an RB2 pretty late. I mean, a bounce back here is inevitable. Now let's get to a couple offenses that we know have to get better this year, starting with your team in Washington.
Yeah, and I've talked about Terry McLaurin a few times. I certainly think Terry McLaurin is going to bounce back this year, but I want to talk about Jahan Dotson on this video because we haven't talked about him, or I haven't really talked about him this year. Last year I was very high on Dotson. Thought he was going to have a big year 2 leap, and instead he kind of had like a big year 2 fall. Like he somehow got worse in year 2 than he did in year 1. But I'm still going to bet on the talent here. He looked the part in year 1. Look, it was Sam Howell, like one of the worst QBs last year. Yes, he attempted the most passes in the NFL and didn't even reach 4,000 passing yards. How was that possible? Averaged only 230 passing yards a game, 21 touchdowns and 21 interceptions. But really the thing I like about Dotson this year, and also Terry McLaurin, but especially Dotson, is how he's going to be used in this offense. Because remember, it's not just Jaden Daniels. It's not just the rookie Jaden Daniels. It's also Cliff Kingsbury. And look, you can say whatever you want about his tenure in Arizona as the head coach. Maybe he's not meant to be a head coach, but his offenses have been good. Even in Arizona, he had talented offenses. He knows what to do on offense. Now he's the offensive coordinator there in Washington. I think that's a great role for him. I think he's going to get the most out of Jaden Daniels. He's going to get the most out of these playmakers. And look, Curtis Samuel is gone. They replaced him with Luke McCaffrey, who I don't really like him at all. I think we could see Dotson move into the slot more, which I think would be great for his fantasy value. I think we could see him used in various ways, use that speed in various ways, and get him looks down the field. Last year, his ADOT, 9.3, which was outside the top 70 wide receivers. They just used him as like a check down, last resort kind of guy. Let's get this guy some plays. Let's get this guy some big plays, use that speed. I think we see that this year. I certainly think Terry McLaurin's going to bounce back, but I also think Dotson is going to bounce back because really, I mean, he almost has to bounce back. He can't be as bad as he was last year again, I hope.
Yeah, having a new quarterback definitely helps, and having a new coach, that's also something we talked about, advanced strategy for your drafts. And Carolina, I don't think any coach is going to help more based on how bad Carolina's offense was last year, and Dave Canales should work wonders for quarterback Bryce Young. Now, Bryce Young, let's basically just hit the reset button here. Think about Trevor Lawrence after his rookie season where, it basically was a lost season because of the coaching staff. Now, I can't say any coach will ever be as bad in every single way as Urban Meyer, but still, it was pretty obvious last year that Frank Reich was lost. That coaching staff didn't do any favors for Bryce Young as a rookie. So Bryce Young now gets to work with a guy in Canales who worked wonders, basically revived Baker Mayfield last year in Tampa Bay. He basically revived Geno Smith's career back when he was with Seattle. And so I don't think it's a big leap to say that he can help Bryce Young take a huge step forward. I don't think Bryce Young is necessarily going to surpass C.J. Stroud or any of the other quarterbacks, that you're drafting as your starting quarterback. I'm not saying he's going to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback, but don't be surprised if he's someone who you find yourself streaming during the season. Don't be surprised if he winds up being startable, and he also leapfrogs over some other quarterbacks who are getting drafted ahead of him at some point during the season. So it's pretty obvious he's due for a bounce back, but I think some people are going to be surprised just how high he can go. Grabbing these bounce back players could be a huge advantage for you, but we also have some other strategies that you should look for on draft day.